Welcome, Leo, to a new cosmic chapter. Saturn returns to Aries on the 14th of February. Aries, of course, shares your fire triplicity. Saturn moved into this part of your chart for just over 3 months on the 25th of May last year. If you did experience perhaps some challenges around a contractual matter, if you traveled somewhere and there were some glitches, or you tried to go for some higher educational courses, and somehow or another it was quite a push to get what you wanted, it wouldn't really be a surprise. But because Saturn rules time and it's returned to the very first degree of the overall zodiac, this is a new journey for us all, one that's going to last for 29 and a quarter years. So we had that brief visit from Saturn last year, which gave us all a taster. But what does the event chart tell us as Saturn arrives this time around? Because if we look at Saturn in isolation, we're going to miss a lot of information. And that's what I'm going to share with you with the wheel on screen. I'm also going to give you the opportunity to download a brilliant information sheet which can help you to navigate the opportunities, but also the potential challenges that Saturn can throw up. Please stay with me to the end. I'm astrologer Patrick Arundel. A very warm welcome. If you're a returning visitor, your views, interactions, comments, and likes are truly appreciated. I've started to have quite a few hives. Thank you if that's you. But if you're new here, thank you for joining us. This is very much a community. But if you've yet to subscribe, please do so now and help the channel to continue to thrive. So on the screen, your ruler, the sun, is in the sign of Aquarius. But if we think it's in the final decan of Aquarius, that last 10 degrees, that's subruled by Venus, very much to do with relating. And the duo of Mars and Pluto being in the seventh house too is intriguing because seventh house energies seem to be about relationships, but it can also be where we need to be more combative, and particularly with Mars in the mix. So I feel that you're going to be encouraged over the next 2 years of Saturn being in Aries to set your boundaries firmer around all sorts of interactions, whether it's at work, whether it's around your social situation, or even around romance. Because Saturn's in the part of your chart that's essentially to do with fairness or philosophy. The ninth house is how we would imagine life could be if it wasn't sometimes quite challenging. But if you are wanting to connect to people, it's important that it works for you. So if you are working for yourself and you're pitching for new deals, it needs to be equitable because the financial side of your situation, the long-term financial side of your situation, is actually very strong in this chart. And if you play your celestial cards right over the next couple of years, although there may be some times when it gets a bit tense in the negotiation, you could come out in a very constructive and positive way. Now, we do have the moon in a very practical part of your chart, the sixth house, in an opposition with the buoyant Jupiter. Now, Jupiter may be in a retrograde, but it has, whilst it's been in Cancer, asking you to get more in touch with your spiritual purpose, but also perhaps your motivations that are not so spoken about. But there's a very generous connection between the two of them. But that also says that however practical you are in your approach and however given you are to others in terms of being supportive, there does need to be those firm boundaries. And that's what Saturn can be about. Now, what about Neptune? Neptune and Saturn were pretty much together. Neptune moved into Aries at the end of March last year for 6 months. For those 3 months and a week last year. And that may have given you some insight into what to expect. Now, if you're someone who's interested in, for example, languages, the creativity of Neptune may have been very good with the structural energies of Saturn. Saturn, of course, encourages us to be industrious. So if you are wanting to push out and do something different, you will need to roll your sleeves up, but that doesn't mean to say that you can't still use your instincts to guide you. And that's where Neptune can be magnificent in the ninth house. You know, if you have got a desire to widen the scope of your existence, as long as you put the effort in, but also pay attention to the more emotional dimension, it can work out well. The only real big challenge in this chart for you is the fact the Sun is in a square with Uranus. And apart from the 4 months in 2025 when Uranus was in Gemini, it will return there on the 26th of April. It's been there for the last 7 years, and the chances are uh, your connection to the world has been at times somewhat unpredictable, or maybe you've had a desire to do something that's very fresh and innovative around your work. If you have started your own business during that time, your timing was impeccable. But the Sun in the square with Uranus suggests that at times the desire to have more stability, which fits in with your fixed nature, has not always been easy for you. So Uranus has shut things up, it's created opportunities, but maybe made things a bit unpredictable. So I think when it comes to professional relationships, or if you're in a personal tie where your connection with the other person, it's a person who does tend to need a lot of space or can make demands or suggest things last minute, which doesn't always quite work for you. So if a relationship is a bit like that, that could be a feature of where Saturn comes into the equation. Because Saturn may see you having to seek out advice. Saturn in the ninth house can be very much to do with accountants, solicitors, business advisors, life coaches, even counseling, because of the ninth house is the person with the big picture and knowledge, but also the experience and wisdom, which is what Saturn's about. Now, it's also possible it's going to be you who's offering those skills into the mix. But just be conscious that Saturn does go into its retrograde on the 26th of July, and that's just after the Sun has moved into your sign. Now, you're going to be blessed by a glorious solar eclipse on the 12th of August, which is going to supercharge the back end of 2026 for you. But I think Saturn in this part of your chart is asking you to be very conscious of what your higher purpose is. And if you're doing something that doesn't really fit with your values, perhaps your morals, it won't necessarily work so well for you. So just be conscious of that. So Saturn retrograde the 26th of July through to the 10th of December, and it will invert 7 degrees. And during that period, if you are traveling anywhere or discussing any kind of contractual matter, really make sure that you've got every single detail tied down and very clear. Now, there are some big aspects coming. On the 8th of March, Venus, the relator, but also the money planet, applies to Saturn in Aries. If you are meeting someone new, if you don't have similar philosophies, that could be an issue. But equally, it would be a great time to make a firm decision on a vacation with an existing partner. On March the 25th, it is the Sun that applies to Saturn. And this is really going to be a powerful moment in this year's particular Saturn journey for you. If you have a big conversation with someone, maybe it is about your worldview, politics, stuff like that, it could get tense. So just be prepared for that. But March the 28th sees Saturn forge a beautiful angle to Pluto. So the knowledge that you absorb and seek can inform your relationships in a very constructive way. It may even be that you get to know someone new where you do have shared interests or a value or values that draw you closer together. But on July the 6th and at the end of the year in December, we do have a square between the Sun and Saturn, but through two different signs. The first time is the 12th house view, the second time is the 6th. If there is something that's bubbling beneath the surface that you're not very happy with before the time of your birthday, it could come up quite strongly at the start of July. At the end of the year, it may be more to do with balancing the practicalities of life with another part of your nature that may want to be freer. And that's perhaps the crunch, Leo, of what Saturn can show up for you over the next couple of years. If you're in a job, a relationship, where you don't feel that you have much wiggle room to do your own thing and you're not quite enjoying it as much as you would like, things could seem a little oppressive. And that therefore requires you to anticipate with Saturn. There always are some things we have to work harder at in order to adapt. So being flexible is very important. But if you did want to start something new, like a new course, um, relocate to a different country, if you wanted to learn a new professional skill, Saturn's saying if you're prepared to really apply yourself, the rewards could be considerable. Now, to understand this particular change, but also the solar eclipse of the 17th, and the fact that Mars and Uranus are squaring in the last week of February, please check out your Leo February deep dive monthly forecast. Now, you can download my guide sheet to navigate the next 2 years by clicking on the link underneath this video. Now, one of the intriguing things about the conjunction between Saturn and Neptune on the 20th of February at 0 degrees is that 0 degrees is the vernal point, so the start of the zodiac. It's where on the spring equinox the whole journey begins again. So having the combination between Saturn and Neptune there is particularly intriguing to me because there's a form of astrology called Draconic astrology, where the North Node is moved from wherever it is in the natal chart to 0 degrees Aries. And that can change a chart quite a bit. But the person I want to give you a little bit of an insight to of how this works is Madonna. So on the screen is Madonna's nativity, and she was a Leo. So obviously, a person who's a performer has to have a degree of glow and radiance and magnetism, and having the sun, but also Uranus in the sign of Leo, along with Venus. Venus, I think, is the love of theatrics. Uranus is the confidence to be different. I think the sun being in the third decan of the sign of Leo, subruled by Mars, is the passion, but also a bit more edge. You can also see when it comes to the edge that Uranus and Mars are in a square. So that gives this person an appreciation of being provocative. Mars is the most prominent planet in the whole chart, so is going to be very important. It's about pushing boundaries. However, if we dive a little deeper, that cluster of energy in her 12th house points towards someone who could think about things very deeply. Obviously, with the Virgo ascendant and the moon on it, someone who has a great appreciation of their immediate environment. But I feel that's the side of Madonna that has a real interest in psychology, healing, and anything to do with mythology and things like the Kabbalah. And in terms of her success, I feel that's driven a lot by the Sun and Jupiter being in a wonderful sextile, so potentially very fortunate. But if we look at that North Node, which I mentioned before, for her it's on a fixed star called Speaker, Spica, and people with planets on Speaker tend to be very prominent, can be hugely successful, and build up a big following. So the combination between the North Node and Jupiter suggests her life karma, her direction of travel, the North Node, has been about finding balance, interest in the arts, but definitely an ability to make money. So that's her natal chart. But let's look at Madonna's Draconic chart. So remember, the North Node is at 2402 in her natal. We go to a Draconic, and there is the North Node at 0 degrees Aries on the exact degree that this Saturn Neptune conjunction is happening. And that's why I wanted to tell you about it. Now, when I did share Madonna's chart a few years ago and said that she was a Leo, I had loads of people write to me and say, no, she's not, she's an Aquarius. But clearly, she is a Leo because she's born on the 16th of August. But in the Draconic version of the chart, her sun is on the anaretic degree of Capricorn. So this is a person with a real instinct for business, but also perhaps with the flavor of progressiveness that comes from Aquarius energy, which is the combination still of Pluto and Mercury, very analytical, but uh, the combination of the ascendant and the moon in Aquarius is very much more to do with being groundbreaking than the Virgo in her natal chart, which can be someone who wants to provide services, is very detail orientated, very organized. She may be all of those things, but in this chart, the more radical part of her nature really is that much more visible. She still has the need to perhaps be more meditative, quiet, take time out of the limelight with the 12th house energy. And also, Saturn in the fourth house means that, you know, home and family is important to her. And I think it's right that she's adopted some children. So that shows a great responsibility and a great empathy to look after those who are less fortunate. But that combination of the planets stay in the same relationship, so we have the same aspect. We still have Uranus in a square with Mars, but Mars here is also very close to Speaker in a nature chart. So as Mars, Draconic, conjunct the North Node and Jupiter in her natal. And, you know, the ninth house is about expansion, it's about risk, independence. Uh, it is true that Mars is technically detrimented, but in this illustration, you can see that the Moon and Mars still very strong, so she's a great communicator. So, what the principles of Draconic astrology are is that they're the root of who we are. So, when we come into this world, Draconic's the root of our personality, and the natal is the fruit that comes from the tree of life that we go through. So, if we really work at it, we can see the outcome of our life physical journey much more like the natal chart. But some people find the Draconic chart represents their personalities much more. For example, my Draconic midpoint, sun and moon, is Cancer, you know, and I am very much a home lover. And people who are close to me, been close to me for a very long time, you know, I value those relationships very much. So, if you'd like to understand the difference between your natal chart and your Draconic chart, just like I've shared for Madonna, you can order your Draconic 12-month forecast and get your character analysis, your Draconic Life Roadmap report. And if you apply Draco 26 at the checkout, you'll get 50% off. But also, if you would like to order your natal 12-month forecast and natal life roadmap report, if you apply Astro 26 at the checkout, you can get 50% off for those too.